Welcome to Anglo-Romani with Pricey. I'm Pricey, and this is the series where I break down the sort of etymology and semantics of words that I grew up with as part of the para-language or dialect of Anglo-Romani. In this episode, we are looking at place names, general place names, and where better to start than with the word place. So a very common Romani word for place is the word tan. Now the word tan itself is kind of used as a suffix only. I mean, it does just mean place on its own, but you would typically put it on the end of another noun and that describes the place. For example, a booty tan is a workplace, a lag tan is a toilet, and a hatchin tan is a stopping place. The thing that this kind of puts me in the mind of is German, where you put Platz on the end of different places. Similarly, with the noun going in front and Platz being used as the suffix. And to be honest, I'm sure this comes up in a lot of other languages. Which leads me on to my next point. The etymology of this one is kind of interesting. If you've been watching this series for a while, you'll probably be expecting me to say right now that the word tan comes from some sort of Indian language, perhaps Sanskrit or perhaps one that's more contemporaneously used. And you wouldn't be too far wrong. It actually has been traced back to the much broader family of languages that all of those Indian languages belong to, as well as pretty much every language in southern Asia, and that being Proto-Indo-Iranian. You see, the best way to think about linguistics sometimes is to imagine it like a big tree, and when you trace a word back to its pretty much its origin, you are getting the trunk of that tree, and then you get the branches, which are like the families of languages, and then the twigs being the languages themselves, and the leaves finally being the words, both contemporary and also the ones which are now no longer used. And tan is just one leaf. And just a couple of branches over, we have the word stan, like for example we get on the end of country names, such as Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and probably maybe some that I've even missed out. But if we go right round to the other side of that tree, we end up finding a branch that contains several sort of Germanic languages on it, and somewhere in amongst there is a leaf with the English word stand. So there's not much to say about the word Kenna, meaning house, aside from the fact that when I was growing up and you were talking about maybe another Romani family and like someone said, oh yeah, they've moved into a Kenna, it always felt like some sort of submittance, some sort of like giving up on the culture. It felt like a blow every time the word Kenna was used. I mean, these days I live in a Kenna and you know, I just see the word Kenna as synonymous with house. In terms of where this word came from, it is definitely one of the more recent additions to the paralanguage that is Anglo-Romani, being that it comes from the British Isles, specifically Kant, much like the word Jota did in a previous video. However, one thing that is kind of interesting about Kenna is that it is a potential, no, very unlikely origin of the word kennel. Perhaps the most iconic imagery that comes to mind when people talk about Romanis in terms of like history is the old Vardo wagons, which is kind of funny because this is like saying chai tea, in that the word Vardo just means wagon, so you're saying wagon. But yes, those old bow-top caravans that used to be used, even were still being used when my dad was very young, he grew up in one for a time, were referred to as Vardo. And it's a whole like thing about sort of Romani culture, you know, when people died, like a head of a family or whatever, they used to burn their wagon as a sort of like cremation. Like I mentioned earlier, the word Vardo does typically get used for these bow-top wagons, but the word Vardo itself actually just means wagon and can also be used to refer to carts, carriages and caravans. Now, because it is such a commonly known term for such an iconic piece of Romany history, the research for this word was very forthcoming, and it comes from a language that I have not yet come across, well, ever actually, but also not as part of this series, that being Ossetian, where it means cart or wagon there, and the word there is sort of Verdon or Verdon. I don't really understand how this word that's on screen now ends up going into Vardo, because the W isn't a V sound, but I could be getting something completely mixed up here. If you do know, please let me know in the comments. If there is one location that has more cultural and historical significance to Romany people and means more to Romany history than any Vardo or Kenna ever did, it is the road. When I was a kid, there were a couple of periods where we headed out on the drum, and those periods were some of the most culturally educational times of my entire childhood, not to mention some of the most freeing and fun times of my childhood. And for the second time in this video, this word is coming from another language that I've not yet come across while researching Angloromani, this being Greek, specifically Byzantine Greek. No, the contemporary Greek word for road actually is the same, so I don't quite know where this one diverges, but apparently this comes from the Byzantine Greek dromos, meaning road. Like I say, the contemporary Greek word dromos also means road. Again, if you know more about this than I do, then feel free to let me know in the comments. Not to be confused with a certain legendary Japanese music venue, this word is really quite fun to say. And I have a lot of memories of my dad saying, you know, I'm just nipping up the Buddika, I'm well into the Buddika, would you like anything while I'm there? Buddika just means shop. And continuing this video's trend of looking at languages that we've not yet looked at in this series, this one comes from a very, very close origin point to where I live today in the southeast of England, that being French. The word Buddika comes from the French word boutique. If you speak English as your first language, you'll know that boutiques tend to refer to the high end of things. We tend to have this thing in English because of ancient history where the upper classes and the lower classes spoke two very different languages in England itself, with the lower classes speaking Anglo-Saxon and the higher classes, like the royals and all that, speaking French as their first language, and the two rarely mixed. So because of that ancient history, English has always seen French terms as being a little bit posh and a little bit upmarket. For example, you would say haute cuisine instead of saying oh yeah, it's posh cooking. Well, in Anglo-Romani, Buddika just means shop. All shops. There's no class difference in terms of what the shop is. If it's a shop, it's a Buddika. And with that, those are all of the general place names that I could think of off the top of my head. If I do think of some more, or I get told some more, then I will make a part 2 to this video. But if nothing else, this is the general place names, and maybe there are other place names that will come up for a future video. And next time I would like to maybe revisit something I've already talked about, perhaps animals, or perhaps something new. I've got a good 2 or 3 weeks to really think about it, so let me know in the comments if you have something that you'd like to see more of that I've already talked about a little bit before. And feel free to check out the rest of the series if you haven't already and you found this video interesting, as well as the rest of my channel if you're into retro gaming or music discussion, or me just waffling about general stuff anyway. And until next time, have a good one.